Resident Evil 4 finally had its remake revealed a few months ago, following rumour after rumour, and whether you think we need it or not, it doesn't matter. There's no stopping it, just like there was no stopping the Last of Us remake that no one asked for, but Resident Evil 4 I can at least understand. It's a 17-year-old game that has room for modern improvements. What I can't understand, however, is why Capcom decided to remake Resident Evil 4 2 instead of the first Resident Evil 4, Code Veronica.
Resident Evil.
Released in the year 2000 for the Dreamcast, you know, that console one of your mates had and you always wanted, and later released in 2001 on the PS2 as Code Veronica X due to the short reach of the Dreamcast console. This version also had extended scenes and came packaged with something that was actually better than the game itself, a demo of Devil May Cry. Dreamy. Code Veronica has been overlooked by Capcom in its remake regime, to the point where fans have taken it upon themselves to remake the game. It's a real shame that we are yet to get word of an official remake, and here are some reasons why Capcom should have remade Code Veronica before Resident Evil 4. Make sure you like the video, give it a thumbs up if you like it, a thumbs down if you don't, and subscribe to the channel to catch all my upcoming videos. Also, massive spoiler warning, as I will be diving into some of the game's narrative points. The first one on my list here is that this is the last classic style mainline Resident Evil game, chronologically. Before Resident Evil 4 introduced the over-the-shoulder perspective to the franchise with great success, all mainline Resident Evil games were from a fixed camera perspective with tank controls. These made for some very frame-worthy shots, but in sacrifice of decent control, at least when going back to them today. Hearing the groans of zombies around the corners causes the heart to skip a beat, but many times we are unable to see where they are, which can be tricky when trying to shoot them. The game does have a lock-on feature, but it doesn't track the zombies, so it may have walked outside of your line of sight and you could be wasting your precious ammo. Code Veronica is the last in the timeline of mainline Resi games to have this classic perspective, and with the exception of Resident Evil 0, it is the only one to not have had a remake. I mean, this alone is reason to give Code Veronica the remake treatment, closing off the classics catalogue. Closing off the classics also comes with some final inclusions of the classic creatures catalogue. Slow moving zombies being one, the iconic zombie dog, hunters, poisonous spiders. I do generally miss these types of iconic monsters in the more recent titles. The Resident Evil 3 remake, whilst I thought that in itself was a huge waste of a time, there is no denying the section with those poisonous spider thingies was one of the most terrifying things in a Resi game. Outside of perspective, Code Veronica's level design for me is not great. RE games are known and famous for implementing backtracking over levels in interesting ways, whether that be a change in the level due to some horrific destruction or jump scares in a corridor you have run through 27 times. It is a core mechanic of the RE formula I love. Code Veronica does do this, however, in making the player backtrack time and time again, especially in the early hours. It feels like it's more due to poor game design. With very limited inventory space and sporadic offerings of item boxes, I found myself going back and forth to collect the most trivial items, red herbs or arrows for the bowgun. Things that could have waited, but if you're anything like me, no item gets left behind. More annoyingly, I would be holding all this stuff and I wasn't able to pick up an important progression item. A great example of this is the military facility. A save room is not available in the level for quite some time, so there was a lot of back and forth from the military training facility to the palace just to make precious space in my inventory. The same could be said about the submarine and airport. On first playthroughs, there is no way of knowing if an item box is coming up and what items will need collecting, so the annoying collect and drop off gameplay was inevitable. It was basically the first Strand type game. The levels themselves are quite interesting and varied with the puzzles and exploration, and a remake is an ideal opportunity to mix up both item placement and save rooms, to give existing fans a fresh experience, but more importantly to give all players less painstakingly frustrating backtracking. This also becomes particularly noticeable when playing as Chris while searching for Claire. Playing as Chris Redfield should be a highlight of the game, but for me it was kind of a drag. Exploring previously explored areas as Claire, the island and Antarctica, there are differences following the destruction of the island and the inclusion of hunters, both classic and poison-infused versions, but from a narrative perspective it was just pretty bland. We know where she is as the player, and searching through these areas again can become pretty tiresome. And a big part of that for me was the lack of weapons and new items. So anything Claire left in the item boxes can be used by Chris if you are smart or lucky enough to leave the grenade launcher and whatever else in the item boxes for this section. If you did that, then you'll have a blast and a much easier time as Chris. However, if this is your first playthrough, or you are like me and haven't played the game since 2001, then there is no way to know this character switch up is coming and you may not prepare for it, leaving you with only a pistol, a shotgun, and an obtainable magnum in the Antarctica if you, as Claire, decided to put the fire extinguisher in the item box and not leave it in that bloody prison metal detector like a dumbass. Yeah, I'm that guy. Piss me off. I guess what I'm trying to say is there is a massive opportunity to give classic Chris an ultimate send-off by not leaving the enjoyment of it to your prior knowledge of the game, perhaps increasing his own personal arsenal or more accessible newer locations on the island to switch it up a bit. The next thing I want to talk about is the game's story. Old school Resident Evil games are cornier than a turkey's turd, but Code Veronica has enough cheese to make Wallace and Gromit puke. The dialogue is just friggin' awful. The villains, Alfred and Wesker,
You have no idea how much I hate you.
have bad guy syndrome and always letting the hero go in convenient "we'll meet again" scenarios.
I'll be sure to keep you entertained before I dispose of you.
Ultimately causing problems for themselves in the future. They've never seen a Bond movie? Fucking hell. Also, I mean, how did Alexia miss at point blank range with a sniper rifle? And how was a hole not blown into Steve the size of King Kong's back orifice?
Why don't you send your brother the coordinates and ask him to come help?
Thanks, I'll do that.
Claire's dialogue is atrocious. Steve is an incredibly unlikable character due to his whinging like a spoiled brat having his iPad taken away.
Father! Father!
It makes the narrative much more laughable than it deserves to be, because the story here is very important to the Resident Evil lore, and with a more mature tone and modern storytelling techniques, it could be one of the more memorable Resident Evil narratives. The restrictions of the Dreamcast and PS2 systems, I imagine, also limited how much of the story was put on screen. With the RE2 treatment, the raiding of the island from Wesker's team, the Norman Bates relationship between Alfred and Alexia.
But I cannot let you escape now.
Alfred, you cross-dressing freak!
Even Steve's story arc has the potential to have a thrilling and emotional edge to it if done in a more believable, grounded way, something that is definitely possible now with the advancements of video game technology. The best egg out of a gone-off tray here are these cheap porn parody love scenes.
Oh, Steve.
Shut up! I don't want to talk about it!
Which naturally leads me into my next point. Code Veronica is the natural continuation of Resident Evil 1 to 3, all of which had remakes over the years. Code Veronica focuses on the relationship and the reuniting of two original characters, Chris and Claire Redfield. Brother and sister have been in separate games since the original, Chris being one of the two playable characters in RE1 and Claire in the same choice in RE2. Claire's story begins with her searching for Chris in Raccoon City, and that journey continues here in Code Veronica to its conclusion, which goes nicely into my ultimate main reason for a remake of Code Veronica. It is the end of the T-Virus and Umbrella era of Resident Evil. The first three Resident Evil games are all about the T-Virus outbreak in Raccoon City and the fall of the Umbrella Corporation. Resident Evil 4 was a sequel, but in some ways, a reboot of the series. A new villain, a new parasite, new gameplay and characters, with the only link really being Leon until further connections in later games. Going from RE3 to 4 is missing out on the conclusion of the Umbrella era, as Code Veronica not only acts as the Redfield reunion, but the T-Virus creation and the history of Umbrella is expanded upon in very interesting ways. Focusing on the Ashford family who founded Umbrella, set in one of Umbrella's testing sites, is a huge piece of Resident Evil history. a remake of Code Veronica is likely not off the table altogether for Capcom. However, for me, it doesn't make sense to do it in the order they have chosen. Especially with the success of the RE2 remake, we are skipping the continuation of Claire's storyline for Leon's, which also makes sense, but from a timeline and overall lore point of view, we are essentially skipping the true RE4 for the next in the series. What do you guys think? Are we skipping an integral part of the Resident Evil timeline in favour of a money-making fan favourite? Or are Capcom right to skip this arguably underrated entry in the survival horror franchise? It's not the best game in the series, but it is an important one, and could be made so much better with the new remake treatment. Oh, sorry, I did actually miss one point. Change, get rid of, do something about this damn Tyrant aeroplane boss fight. Tight space, large hitboxes, heavy damage, wait for the button to turn blue. This boss fight is fucking terrible and it's a pain in my ass. You know how many attempts this took me back in the day, and even now, it's embarrassing. Utter shite.
What was wrong?
Oh, nothing. Just a giant cockroach that had to be stepped on.